Olá, bom dia. Mais uma vez, eu gostaria muito de agradecer a presença de todos vocês aqui hoje, nessa manhã. Eu espero que, em continuidade aos trabalhos de ontem, nós também tenhamos uma manhã super produtiva, com um diálogo muito afetuoso e muito profícuo, tal como foi a nossa tarde de ontem. Eu gostaria também de aproveitar para agradecer muito ao Instituto de Ciências Humanas, ao Abdul, ao professor Alexandre Diniz, que deu todo o apoio para a gente, ao Instituto de Ciências Sociais e também à Faculdade de Psicologia, a professora Luciana Kindi, que sempre apoia todas as nossas atividades. E, mais uma vez, gostaria de agradecer ao professor Nir pela delicadeza de estar aqui presente conosco, partilhando suas experiências, suas pesquisas, nos provocando a pensar cada vez mais sobre as questões relacionadas aos imigrantes e às juventudes, e as formas como as juventudes têm de se expressar nos territórios, nos espaços e lutar por cidades melhores. Bom, agora eu vou traduzir, não do mesmo jeito, mas de outro jeito, em inglês. Good morning, thank you all very much for being here. Once again, on behalf of our research team, I'd like to express my sincere thanks to Professor Nir for his visiting to PUC Minas, his presence with us these days has been a source of great pleasure. Allowed me to introduce Professor Nir Cohen once again. He's a geographer and head of Department of Geography and Environment at Barilan University. And in his lecture, he will share with us some reflections on urban space of youth resistance. It's a great honor to welcome you. Thank you, Nir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Raquel. And thank you all for those of you who came yesterday and returned today. I guess that means yesterday wasn't such a traumatic experience. And for the new faces and new participants, of course, thanks for joining us. I'm going to start my timer here just to make sure that I don't go overboard. Okay, can you see clearly enough, or do you want to kill one of the lights? Yeah, is it okay? Okay, you want it a bit darker, whatever. Okay, so it's actually it wasn't planned like that, but I think the two talks, the one I gave yesterday and the one I'm going to give now, are pretty good sort of reflections or evidence of the kind of work that I normally do. I wear two hats: the hat of a migration scholar, which was basically what I focused on yesterday, and my other, perhaps more recent hat that I'm wearing is an urban scholar. But as you saw yesterday, I'm trying to combine both. But what I'm going to do today is focus or wear much more pronouncedly my urban scholar hat. This is a project that is, I'd say that even more. One second, this is strange. It's supposed to be another. Sorry. Yeah, my colleague's name wasn't appearing, and I should, give her the credit that she deserves. So this is even more than yesterday. It's a work in progress. It's a project that we've been working on since probably sort of mid 2024, so about a year and a half. My colleague Hila from the college up in the north of Israel. And what we're doing, and I think Raquel knows it, and maybe I've heard a significant part of the presentation in our PhD school about a year ago in Vienna, where we focused on youth and material and digital spaces in the city. So the project basically looks at, as you can tell from the title, it basically looks at the resistance of youth. And youth is a very sort of kind of fluid concept. We're talking about mostly about young people. I'm not going to get into definitions, but in parts of the literature, youth is up to the age of 21, parts is, much, much older, 30, 35, and so on and so forth. So for us, in most cases, we're talking about folks who are below the age of 30. And what we are looking at is more broadly, of course, the case of Israel is just a test case. But what we are looking at more broadly is the nexus between youth, protest, and urban space. And as you can see, it's certainly not a new topic. It's been researched and discussed at least since the late 80s, early 90s. Since the 90s or the past 25 or so years, there's a surge in interest because of anti-globalization campaigns, the campaigns against the World Bank, IMF, World Trade Organization. Then there were, I'm sure you know or remember, the Occupy movements following the economic crunch of 2007, 8, 9. The Arab Spring was, of course, a major kind of point of interest. Started in Tunisia and then spread to other countries, Libya, Egypt, some of the Gulf countries, and so on, Syria, of course. I mean, you could argue, and it's probably true, that there's a youth element in pretty much every protest. If we look at just things from the past 2-3 years, perhaps a bit more by now, the Black Lives Matter in the US, the Mahsa Amini protest in Iran, the woman who was allegedly beaten to death by the security forces in Iran, the pro-Palestine campaign globally in the past couple of years and even before that. Certainly, as you can see, I hope in some of the pictures, the leaders are very often young people, or maybe if not the leaders, then certainly activists are young people. Oops, sorry. So the question is really why youth and why urban? I think it's the answers are pretty obvious, but we'll cover them anyways. Why youth and why youth revolt? I think in terms of when we have some psychologists in the room, in terms of the psychology behind youth protests, they're considered more energetic, they're more willing to take risks, right? Because supposedly they have less to lose. They tend to disrupt traditional social order perhaps more easily, or it's something that comes more naturally to them because they're still not settled in their sort of state of minds, perhaps like older people. They are the future, right? So it almost makes sense for them to be more engaged. And perhaps, and this is a question mark, but perhaps they're more naive, I guess some people would say, thinking that if they protest, then things will change. From a sociological perspective, we have, of course, the age dimension, which is critical, but also I would say an ethnic and ethno-class position. In other words, it is usually, although not always, the ones that are perhaps more privileged, the more middle class, and in some cases, or upper middle class, who feel privileged and secure enough to go out and protest. Why urban space? I think it's, again, it's pretty obvious. Geographically speaking, most of the countries that we have been looking at are very urbanized. High percent of youth in cities, we know that. And there's generally a gravitation of young people to cities. I've been to Poland a few years ago, different research, and we've driven with our hosts through some villages, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours away from Warsaw. And we were told repeatedly on the significant outmigration of young people from villages to places like Warsaw and Krakow and so on and so forth. First for university, then for work, then just basically their intentions is to never return to rural communities. So urbanization is high in general, and it's even more pronounced amongst young people. Obviously, from a sociological perspective, again, cities are have always been spaces of where social and political consciousness develops, right? Even if we go back to Marx and Engels' Manchester in the mid 19th century, right, and so on. And then, of course, cities are, as we know, much more multicultural environments, especially large cities, global cities, than rural communities. So there's a whole literature in geography and urban studies about the geographies of encounter, right? So what does it mean in urban context to encounter the other? And the other could be individuals of different sexual orientation, from diverse ethnic and racial backgrounds, people of various legal statuses, like we talked about yesterday, and so on and so forth. So the cities make a lot of sense, also in terms of what they offer to young people, and they it's where social and political conscious tends to be more salient. So, oops, I keep going backwards. Sorry. So, just sort of a very brief history. Really, I don't do justice in 1 minute, but about youth protests in Israel. I'd say that generally speaking, there's a tendency. We can can talk about it later whether it's true or not. There's a tendency to blame young Israelis of being apolitical. I think the reasons for that, or the explanations for that, are at least threefold. There are others, but these are, I think, the most important ones. The age of 18-21, which in most countries of the world, I don't know if most, but a significant portion of countries of the world, people are in college or in university, right? If it's a 3-year university like in Canada, or if it's a 4-year college like the US or in other countries. However, in Israel, the majority of people in those ages, they are in the military. Okay, it's true for both men and women. Women serve 2 years, men serve 3 years. Okay, and often if they choose to make it into a career, sometime they serve beyond the age of 21, so 24, 25. So the majority, for example, of my students are in their mid-20s. That's when they start their BA, 23, 24, 25, okay? It's not uncommon. The other thing that happens, and it follows from what I just said, if you start your higher education when you're 24, 25, then your life is a bit more complicated, in the sense that in most cases, again, my students, they don't want to live at home anymore, okay? So they tend to study, they tend to have a part-time job, okay, in order to fund or pay their way through school. It doesn't mean that they don't get some support from their parents in some cases. Plus, very often, by the time they are in their second or third year, and certainly when they're doing their master's degree, they're already either married or married with at least one child. I have a PhD student who is 31 or 32 now. She's been with me since undergraduate, so 10 years. She started, I think, when she was 21. She did all of her 3 degrees with us in geography, and she just had her 3rd child. Okay, she's 31 or 32, and so basically got married at the end of her BA, had her first child towards the end of her master's, and now hopefully she has 1 more year, sorry, to finish her, excuse me, to finish her PhD, and she's already, raising a family. So that's the second explanation. This sort of busier life, if you can say that. And then I think a third explanation is the Arab-Israeli or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And this has much to do, I think, also with the protests. When, again, this is very political psychology, but when there's a sense that there's an external threat, what we see in a lot of society is this phenomenon of rally around the flag. So you don't protest against your own government if about domestic issue, could be political, could be economic, if you feel there's a greater threat from the outside and if unity is important. So protesting or emphasizing the lines of division can often be considered as a dangerous act or an act that is criticized. Okay? So I think these are three explanations. Now, this has been changing. It's not, you know, it's very, it's not static. It's a very dynamic process. And I think since the 70s, maybe as a ripple effect of the 60s, you know, the hippies in the US and so on and so forth, the May 68 protests in Europe, in France, and so on, there's been a change. I won't get into them, but these are some campaigns that were led mostly by youth, Black Panthers, the reservist protest after the 73 war. This is primarily of Palestinian citizens of Israel. Yeah. Oh, okay, thanks. Palestinian citizens of Israel that in the mid 70s protested against the confiscation of land. Thank you. A bit hoarse, my voice. Thanks. Protested against the confiscation of lands by the Israeli government. And so it was both the Jewish Israeli community as well as the Arab or Palestinian Israeli communities that protested. So I think we can definitely say that we're seeing some changes over the years. What are the key lacunas that we've seen in the literature in terms of the research that was conducted so far? At least 4 elements were missing. First of all, treating the city as a site, as a container, rather than talking about the urban, okay, as a complex set of social and political relations. Very often, there was a focus on one singular site, okay? So, you know, a particular square or something like that. This was, for example, very common also in the literature about the Arab Spring, where the Tahrir Square in the middle of Cairo was singled out as a major site of resistance, okay, or protest. So focusing on one singular site, whereas in our case, we wanted to see something that's a bit more dynamic and that happens across different sites. There was a very static outlook. So looking at specific encampments. So Misgav and Fenster, two geographers of a few years ago, published an article that basically looks at an encampment of young people in southern Tel Aviv. But for us, the mobility, the movement, the processions, the rallies, the walking, the blocking of intersections was very important. Okay, so we wanted to get away from a very static perspective. Finally, methodologically, there was very limited engagement with protesters themselves. Okay, all of these folks are colleagues, and some of them are more than colleagues. So I appreciate their work, but it's suffered some, in our sort of perspective, some difficulties or challenges. So what this project is trying to do is, first of all, to take a relational position to youth, see youth not as an age, but as a set of relations between actors, some of whom participate in the protest, some of whom do not. We want to treat the urban as an agent of change, a key player in the dynamic nature of protests. We did adopt a multi-sited and mobile methodology. So for example, we did some interviews, or we followed the protesters, trying to understand from them what it feels like to protest while moving, okay? And then obviously through interviews to give voice to the young activists, okay? So I'm just going to start by contextualizing things, and I should say right away that the protest that we're looking at is pretty much 3 years old. Okay, it started January of 2023. Okay, so next month will be 3 years. Now, I should say it started out as a protest against the judicial reform, which I'll explain in 3 sentences because it's too it's too complicated even for locals to understand. It sort of then changed the type of protests change, not so much in terms of the composition of people, but in terms of what was the main motivation. So after October 7th, okay, there was, first of all, there was a hiatus. People felt that it wasn't the right moment to get out to the streets. And so from about October 2023 to roughly, I'd say, June maybe of 2024, there were hardly any protests. There were, but they were very few and far between. And when people returned to the streets, it was mixed of protests against the reform, but also for the ending of the war in all fronts, certainly in Gaza, but also Lebanon and so on, and for the return of the hostages. Okay, and now there's in the last 3 or 4 months, the protesters are out there trying to, or not trying, calling for elections, early elections, very often for the resignation of the prime minister and for the establishment of a fact-finding committee, saying after 3 years of constant conflict and reform, it's time to figure out what went on there over the years. So, but the most of our interviews were conducted in the period until about August 2024. Okay, so they were mostly concerned with the judicial reform. So I should just say very quickly, in January 23, as soon as the current right-wing government is formed, the Minister of Justice announces a legislative package, basically aiming to overhaul the judicial system. I won't get into it, but they were trying to change the composition of the judicial selection committee. There were other measures, and that immediately drew very, very strong criticism from not just from the opposition, but from a lot of Israelis who were concerned that the new laws would undermine judicial independence and grant the government unchecked power. Okay. Now, as we were participant observant in many of the rallies, I can say that very often the measures that the government was taking were compared to what was going on at the time or a little before that in Poland and in Hungary. Okay, this idea of trying to roll back democracy and make it into an illiberal democracy or something like that. Okay, changing the or reforming completely the judicial system. Okay, so that was the main motivation, and very quickly after, we started seeing between January and October 2023, like I said, large-scale protests across the country. The protesters, if I had to sort of define them, it was very difficult to define them demographically. They were both young people, old people, people who are more would consider themselves left, people who are more kind of soft right. So it wasn't necessarily, it wasn't a clearly defined groups. It was very heterogeneous. A lot of young groups, though. They were very, very active and involved, especially when we entered the summer months. So June, July, August, September of 2023, when students are on vacation. So students, a lot of representatives or members of the LGBTQ community, the Pink Front, which I'll talk about in a minute, and these are just different names. Youth Now, the White Robes. White Robes were a group of medical students and young doctors who formed their own sort of group. Okay, and one of the things they used to do is to actually come to the rallies with white robes. Okay. There were also people in the high technology industry. There were a lot of many groups, including, by the way, faculty members. And so public space, and as you can see, this is a picture taken from a drone in one of the early protests. I think it was estimated there were about 150 or 200,000 people that evening. So public space was obviously very important. So what the research was doing, or trying to do, is to explore the unique characteristics of youth protest throughout the 23-24 campaign. Like I said, it was kind of split. It was going on between January and October 7th, and then there was a bit of a kind of a stop or a slowdown. And then from roughly the summer of 2024 onwards, I should just say that today the protests continue, but they draw much smaller crowds. Okay. So the questions were, what were and what are the unique characteristics of youth protests as part of the wider protests? And what I would maybe focus on more is the spatial practices of protesters to reform or form existing and new urban public spaces. So there were a lot of like sort of practices that were sort of made us curious about what's the role of urban space in protest, especially of young people. So the methodology is we've conducted personal interviews with leading activists in two associations or two groups. One is called the Pink Front, okay, and basically whenever I quote someone from that group, it will be in pink, so it'll be easier to recognize. And the Students' Protest, okay, in blue. And then we did online research. Again, I think this is something I don't speak about very much in this presentation, but digital space was no less and perhaps more important for the youth, for the protests of youth. Again, people in their 50s or 60s or 40s, when they go out, then they carry signs or banners, and maybe they'll chant and walk the walk. But people in their early 20s or their late teens or even a bit older, they would live stream. They would, make sort of on the spot kind of pictures and upload them to Insta. So digital space was extremely important, and I don't think we've paid enough attention to it. So this is something that needs to be thought about a bit more seriously. So just something to point out. But we did have an online research, news media, social media, and then we were there almost every evening, sometimes together, sometimes alone, with family or with friends, and so on and so forth. So let me just quickly introduce the organizations. So the first one is the Pink Front. I mean, I'm not going to show you. There's a really nice video, 2-minute video presenting the group. You can, I can send you the link and you can look. It's in English, okay, or it's translated to English. So it's pretty interesting to see. What is the Pink Front? So the way they define themselves, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but they define themselves as an activist movement that promotes values of liberty, democracy, and equality. We work to spread hope for a pink future. This whole focus on pink is a major element. A lot of the leaders of the movement are gays or lesbians or queers or different types of LGBTQ. And so it's a way of reclaiming their identity. Okay. So this is not, they're not posing for the camera. This is what they look like on a Saturday night or on a Tuesday night when they protest. Why pink? Because it cannot be a symbol for fascism and evil. Pink is a color that reflects sensitivity, softness, compassion, childhood, love, hope, and optimism, and so on and so forth. So it's a very conscious decision to wear pink, which is, again, if you think about it, one of the things that one of the leaders of the group told us. He said, if you think about in history, protests were or resistance is associated with very different colors. I can think of red, the Red Brigades, or green, or black for sure, but never pink, right? Pink is sort of a feminine color. I mean, who wants to, right? Little girl, that's what he said. Little girl wear pink or have pink dolls, but we are reclaiming this color. So they've been, like I said, they've been around since 2020. The focus of their protest changed. This is, for example, calling for the resignation of the prime minister. This reads in Hebrew simply, go. Okay? This is, it's slightly later. I think this is after the COVID. It says an entire generation demands a pink future. This one is already from 2024, and it says the hostages is above everything, basically sending a very clear message to Netanyahu and his government that it's about time to end the war on all fronts. You wouldn't know it, but I don't know if Portuguese is gender sensitive language. Is it? Yeah, because you have obrigado and obrigada. That's right. I learned that a few days ago. Hebrew is the same, and so they always use the feminine. So this says hostages in the feminine form, and this is simply the community fights. Okay, and this is for gay rights. I don't know if you can see, but there's, for example, this is the slogan of the young gay groups. All right, the students' protest. Sorry, I'm gonna do it very quickly because I'm halfway through my time. Established in 2023, in contrast to the other group, these guys were formed, especially after the judicial reform. And as you can see, prevent the judicial revolution. They don't call it reform or overhaul. They call it simply a revolution. And stop Israel's regression into a dictatorship. Okay? Female and male students from the entire political spectrum, always trying to get away from political tags. We're not left, we're not right, we're not straight, we're not queer, we're everything together. Okay? All right. So this is just a bit of a kind of a theoretical bit. Urban space, we know, has been key to protests in general, but in Israel and in Israeli youth protests in particular. I won't read that, but that's just so you trust me that the research is contextualized conceptually as well. So social spaces never exist simply in themselves. They exist through the relations and so on and so forth. Never mind. Okay, so a few things. This is in terms of like sort of findings already or empirical data. So the main idea behind the Pink Front was performing in and through public space and creating a spectacle which really helped mobilize people. So very often they told us, like this guy said, my involvement with the group began when I started attending rallies. I had a megaphone, and so naturally I was gravitated towards the noise. to the megaphones and drums. I literally met them, the group, through space and wanted to become part of them. So the whole thing, again, it's hard. If you look at the video that I pointed, you will see it. It's not the protest that you normally see people just walking in a kind of a dull way and saying, I don't know, work now or human rights or something like that. They drum, they play, they have all kinds of like the one we saw before. See, they're always painting their faces in pink and bodies and carrying. This is, I don't know if you could see, but the flag of Israel. Generally, it's blue and white. Here, it's pink and white. Okay, and even the colors of the megaphones, they've painted them pink. Again, we don't do active recruitment. She's the co-leader of the group. She said, we don't do active recruitment. People see us in rallies on the street. It's hard to ignore us. So people see us, hear us, and then they come and like, whoa, it's so cool, so pretty. Can we join you? And that's how we grew in size. So they literally never had to, recruit members, because for them, the performance in public space and making themselves visible through paint, through sound, through spatial disorder, which I'll talk about in a minute, that was their key strategy. So disruption was not a curse in their discourse. In other words, both groups articulated their main goals in terms of disrupting an already chaotic space. Very often when we asked them, they said, everything is messy anyways. The government is leading us towards dictatorship. There are the spaces of democracy in Israel, which were small to begin with. They're shrinking. And so we are disrupting something that is already disrupted. The social order is to begin with a disorder. Okay? So social spatial disruption, both in terms of color, both in terms of gender, both in terms of ethnicity. I won't get into that because I really want to get into the spatial aspect or the urban aspect. So chaos for them is both an a priori natural feature of space as well as an objective in and of itself. In other words, they say this is reality. It's messy, it's disorderly, it's disruptive. So we're just going to do our part. And this guy who we interviewed says, the sentence we always tell our members is, space is chaotic. We don't plan too much. Okay? We kept saying that all the time. It was like our motto. Take care of yourselves because space is chaotic. And this had a very important meaning also in terms of their ability to protect their members. Because very often they said, if the police gets brutal, you should know. There are hundreds and thousands of protesters. We cannot secure all of you. So take care of yourself. That's why, I don't think we cover it here, they refused to have younger than 18 to join their protests. And if they did, and they wanted to become activists, they had them to sign their parents, because they said we cannot be responsible. We know where the evening starts. We don't know how it's going to evolve. And if you're 17 or 18, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but space out there is chaotic and the police could be brutal. So chaos doesn't necessarily mean inability to plan, but the plans are bound to change given the situation on the ground. So these are just a few quotes. You can read them. This idea of planning unplanned space, managing unmanaged space. One guy said, what's funny is that people who follow us sometimes don't know where they are going. It's all about the art of improvisation. The most exciting and unplanned protest was the first one because you knew nothing you manage nothing, but unmanaged is better. Okay, so this idea that let's play it by ear, as they say in English, right? Let's not plan too much. We know where we're going. We know we're at the starting point. We don't know who's going to join us. We don't know how the evening is going to end. Okay. So the thing that I want to focus on in the last 15 or 20 minutes is really what interests us. Hila is an urban sociologist, and I'm an urban geographer. Sorry. And so, what's really one of the things that we like to sort of explore is how urban morphology and the city itself impact social protest. So we saw that they were instrumental to how protests unfold in at least three ways. One is urban form. That is, how is the city built physically or materially? Is there a grid, right? What is the width of the streets? What is the structure? Whether there are cul-de-sacs, location of highways, and so on and so forth. This would be interesting for planners and architects, right? So nobody really, I think, when they plan a city or a neighborhood, think about how it's going to be used by activists, but it goes with the territory, or it comes with the territory. The second thing, which we found really interesting and people kept referring to it, was the actual topography. So I'll give an examples in a minute. Is it a plain landscape, or is it a hilly landscape? We were driving through Belo Horizonte the other day, and I was pointing to Raquel that this would be it's a good city to exercise if you walk or bike, but if as a protester you have to choose your route very carefully, because otherwise you'll be out of breath, especially people my age. I don't know about younger people, but you'll be out of breath in 5 minutes. So the actual topography of the city plays a role. And finally, of course, we cannot ignore social geographies, social boundaries. Not all spaces are friendly spaces. Okay? You have to remember that even though 100 or 200 or 300,000 attended a rally, doesn't mean that there aren't 2 or 3 or 4 or 500,000 out there who are against the rally. And so sometimes there were clashes. Okay? I remember one time I went, it was to document, but also to participate in a big rally outside the High Court of Justice in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is known to be, let's say, a bit more nationalistic than other cities in Israel. It's very religious. And so I remember walking down the street with a shirt that it was obvious from the text on the shirt that I was anti-reform. And, we were, cars that passed by were, hurling at us and saying all kinds of things that I probably shouldn't repeat here. So not all spaces were as friendly. Not all spaces were familiar. So if you're originally from Tel Aviv and you decided to protest in Jerusalem, then it's a much more difficult, complex, challenging, and unfamiliar environment. You don't know where to go. And it wasn't an unusual thing to see people, with Google Maps, right? During the their application open during the protest, saying, "Oh no, we should go this way. No, let's go this way," like that. So it was the city and urban space were very, very instrumental. All right, so just very quickly a few quotes just to show you what we mean by urban form. And so this is, for example, again, this is from the student protests. He said the morphology of the streets in Jerusalem is different than in Tel Aviv. They're narrow and crowded. So it's easier for the police to cage you. When they mean they cage you, that, if it's a narrow street and there are no turns, then if somebody comes from that way and somebody from behind you, they cage you and that's it. The protest is over. Either they tell you to get away from there or they arrest you. Okay? They block a few strategic access points and you're stranded. Also because demonstrations concentrate around key symbols like the Knesset, which is the parliament, the prime minister's house, the president's house, this whole area, it's more difficult to play games with the police. Okay? Another guy from the Pink Front said, the structure of the city, which is pretty flat, he's talking about Tel Aviv, and has many streets that you can use to run out of the areas. Plenty of major arteries. You have many options, you always have alternatives. So that's funny because that's, or interesting because you don't always think about, protests in terms of how, your course of action will be determined by the structure of the city, the morphology, the urban morphology. And the more they went out, the more familiar they've become with the environment, with the urban environment, and the more sophisticated they've become. So one protest that I've attended, I was following a group that was led by activists of the Pink Front, and they were trying to get access to the highway. Why? Because they wanted to get down to the highway and block it. Now, the police has already figured out what they were, it became a sort of a cat and mouse kind of game. So the police knew that that was their intention. So earlier that evening, they fenced the whole highway, all the possible entry points to the highway. So one of the leaders of that group, he knew exactly where to go, I don't know, 200-300 meters south to a place where the fence was sort of removable. They removed it, went to the highway, and still managed to block the road that night. So that's one thing. Another thing, I got about a little over 10 minutes, so I'll go quickly. The urban physical geography of protests. So this is a quote that I really like. This a guy from the students process. He says, geographically, Jerusalem is really difficult because of its topographical structure, because it's really steep and mountainous. All the fun runs we do with policemen in Tel Aviv, right? Because I told you it's a cat and mouse. In Jerusalem, I'm breathless after a few short minutes. It's really hard. And so that was one of the reasons why a lot of them, even though Jerusalem is the capital and it's where the prime minister's house and the president's house, very often they chose to focus on Tel Aviv. But there was another reason. The majority of them were from either the city of Tel Aviv or the metropolitan area. And so they knew the city much better. So urban familiarity was very important. A question we tended to ask in every interview was, does your personal knowledge as a resident of the city, your spatial orientation in the city, do you feel that it serves you? And so these are just two sort of, I won't read everything, but everybody said, sure, many times, blah, 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 to get away with the police. We know the city. So just like in that rally that I described to you a minute ago, go a bit south, walk the street and not that one, because that's where things were. In other words, we know how to get away from those who wish to stop us. Whereas in Jerusalem, sorry about the language, I know shit about the urban geography of Jerusalem, right? It's a 60, that's only, the distance between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem is about 60 kilometers, okay, about 40 miles. And yet there's a world of differences between them, okay? So I know nothing about the urban geography of Jerusalem. We reached a huge highway and I'm like, okay, what's now? Because I have no idea how Jerusalem is built and I can't navigate there at all. I mean, sometime I had to use Google Maps to find my way back to the train station. That's the train station that all the activists use to ride to Jerusalem and back to Tel Aviv at the end. So yes, familiarity with space is very important, okay? Finally, the third element, which is important, is the social geographies of the city. And the question we posed was, where does it feel uncomfortable or unpleasant or dangerous? So a third city that I will introduce, this is the fourth largest city in the country. It's called Be'er Sheva. And again, it is known as a sort of a more right-wing hub Okay, the majority, I think, of the population there in the last elections and pretty much in every election votes for the prime minister and political parties that form the coalition. So it's as he says here. I know that people in the environment is also hostile. One time they even stole our stage the night before. I should say one thing about it. As protests became a weekly event, of course, you cannot, and they took place Saturday night usually. So you cannot, because Saturday is also the day of rest in Israel. It's like Sunday in most of the world. Most people don't work. So what they did, the protesters, was Thursday already, or Friday at the latest, they hired a stage construction company to build a stage, because the stage is where the speeches will be given from, right, in the main square or something. So very often, or in some cases, they say that residents of the city who aren't particularly supportive of the protest actually stole the stage. You know, they took maybe some of the speakers or some of the poles or whatever. So yes, the environment is much more hostile in other city. Another guy was even more blunt, and he said, as soon as you get of the central part of Tel Aviv, even in the south, more generally, when you get out of Tel Aviv, you feel that there's less support of your cause, of the protest, and you should be ready for some physical or human challenges. All right, so just in terms of maybe a few points of discussion, because like I said, this is something that we're still kind of grappling with, and obviously this paper, when it's more mature and written up at some point, will go to an urban journal, journal in urban geography, urban studies, planning, whatever, we haven't decided yet. So two kind of points to think about for us, and maybe for you to reflect on, because I know a couple of days ago, what's today? Today's Tuesday. So I know Saturday there was a big demonstration in central town here. I don't know if some of you have attended or not, but it would be interesting to hear about how space features or has featured in protests you've attended personally in your own city or elsewhere, or if you heard about. I think that's something. And then in terms of disruption that I talked about, can we think of other disruptions? We talked about chromatic, we talked about gender, we talked about, of course, physical, social, and so on. But how, and especially in protests led by youth. Okay, so I think this is basically just the last slide, which gives you a bit of a context for what Hila and I, where we're coming from in terms of our affiliation. All right, so maybe I'll stop here, and if you have questions and comments, whatever, or just want to share from your own experience of participating in protests or hearing from friends or something, I think that would be interesting. Thank you.
Então vamos chegar às cadeiras para frente. We'll move to be more close.
Oh, okay.
Rejuvenesce fazendo isso, tá vendo? Aí a gente também tem que falar I just have this paper.
Yeah, that's fine. Just to join a few words. So everybody is still with us. Nobody left. Good.
Deixa alguém começar. Não, a prioridade é dos jovens. Podem começar.
Yeah. Hello, thank you again, Professor. I have to say that this was kind of new for me because yesterday was my expertise, my area of expertise. Today is actually a bit of new kind of studies. But I would like to know a bit more about the contexts of what the protesters were protesting against, because I have to apologize. I don't know exactly how the system of Israel works. Like because you mentioned a judicial thing, a judicial campaign. I don't know, and I don't know. Do you have like the three systems as we have here, like as Rousseau? Yeah, because I would like to know. My question is, in Brazil, we have been we've been having a lot of young political people, young people working in politics, being in Congress, in Congress and in
Parliament?
yes, in cities and in Brasilia as well. So I would like to know if in Israel that occurs as well. Like people, there are people protesting, but they are working inside as well, like trying to make some kind of changes in this aspect.
Okay, now good question. First of all, about the context, I didn't want to spend too much time because it's really boring, but it is important. You're right. We have the three sort of arms of the government, the judicial arm, and then the parliament, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. The problem was that the executive, meaning the government, very early on when it was elected, decided to significantly reduce the influence and the power of the judiciary. That was the whole thing. So basically they said, and the argument was very weak, but we won't get into that, but they said, listen, for many, many years it was pretty obvious that judges appoint themselves or their friends. And they're all, let's put it bluntly, left of the center. Okay? It's about time we change this and we allow more conservative judges to be elected for all different scales of the judiciary, for the local, for the regional, and for the national. So how do we do that? For example, we change the composition of the selection committee of judges. Instead of having just, I don't know, lawyers and former judges, we'll have some more politicians. And of course, who are going to be the politicians? They're going to be the ones that are more associated with the government. Or another thing that really bothered a lot of people, in Israel, every minister and every ministry has a legal advisor. Now, legal advisors are appointed, are civil servants. In other words, they are not, in theory at least, they are not associated with any political party. Okay, and very often ministers that ended, or ministers that started their new position, decided to keep the old advisors because they were professionals. They were good at what they were doing. They didn't care about what they voted in the last elections. One of the things that the reform was suggesting was to turn legal advisors into a political appointment. In other words, they will still be public servants, but their appointment will be at the discretion of the minister. Now, if the minister is a political person and he can appoint somebody who is a political person, then of course it's going to change completely the nature of, because legal advising is supposed to be what it is, legal. Okay?
And they're supposed to be independent as well, right?
So that's exactly what, there were other measures, but that was exactly what bothered a lot of people. And they said, essentially what you are trying to do, what the government is trying to do, is to overhaul or revolutionize things that have been pretty much set in stone since the independence of the country, since 1948. And it's not like there weren't right-wing coalitions over the years. God knows that we've had right-wing coalitions since the mid-70s. But even those coalitions respected the legal and political order and didn't try to change it. Once this government was elected 3 years ago, it was almost the first thing, the first bill that was tabled by that government. Meaning it's almost like they waited for the coalition to be formed in order to pass their revolutionary program. So that was it. As far as young people in government, yes, there are, but or in public service, in cities and so on and so forth, they are there. But and some of them may have been out on the streets. You know, it's hard to say what one's day job is in the evening when he or she protests. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that there were some of those. I mean, if you think about it, academics and doctors are also public servants, right? I mean, I don't know what it's like here, but in Israel, the vast majority of hospitals are public hospitals. And universities, colleges are slightly different, but universities are, with the exception of one, we have 9 public universities and 1 private university. So
in the whole country,
in the
or
whole
just
country.
in?
No, in the whole country. 10 public university, 9 public universities, 8 or 9, I forget now. 1 private. It was just founded like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Colleges, we have about 60 colleges spread around the country. Maybe 5, 10 are private, the rest are public. So the higher education system, the health sector, and many other sectors in Israel are still very public. And so, but it was very common to see public servants during the day protesting at night. Okay, so yeah, so that's the maybe a bit more broadly.
Thank you.
Maybe people would like to comment on. Maybe people would like to comment about like it could be Portuguese or Spanish, I don't care. About protests. What's that? No, but I know a few words. No, you translate just like yesterday. They ask in Portuguese. You thought I spent the last hour speaking English where I could actually speak Portuguese? No.
Então eu vou.
No. Yeah, no. I understand very basic conversations in Spanish, but no, in Spanish a little better, but nothing close to speaking in public. Yeah.
Eu vou fazer um comentário, então. Quando eu fiquei sabendo da palestra, antes de. Peraí, deixa eu organizar, que senão você não vai conseguir traduzir. Eu fui procurar mais a respeito de como a geografia pode estar influenciando em questões de protesto depois de ficar sabendo da palestra. Então, levando em consideração a isso e a temática da palestra e tudo que eu ouvi até o momento, me levou a um questionamento a respeito do espaço geográfico físico e virtual.
relation to protest.
Agora eu vou ler. Qual é o papel dos espaços virtuais na mobilização juvenil contemporânea e como eles se articulam ou entram em conflito com a ocupação dos espaços físicos da cidade?
So the more digital,
Agora a
the more
segunda
digital,
parte.
the virtual, how they're connected. Protest itself. Oh, before that, the preparation. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good question. First of all, WhatsApp. I get the sense that it's very very useful application here in Brazil. I don't think any of my colleagues in Europe use WhatsApp as much as I've seen colleagues here use. So I feel yeah. I mean, even when I spend time there, maybe it's just some of my colleagues are so anti phones that they don't even have smartphones. They have dumb phones, as we call them. So they don't use. But just to the point, WhatsApp groups, which I'm part of, I continue to, we asked the activists to add us to the groups. They're extremely active. During the week, it's no more just about the protests on Saturdays or Sundays or whatever. It's about very different activities. It could be lectures given by some politicians. It could be lectures or town hall events where academics, for example, who are from the law faculty, explain about the danger of the judicial reform. So WhatsApp is extremely important. For example, the most recent protests on Saturday, there's a time difference of 5 hours between here and Tel Aviv. So around Saturday morning, maybe 10ish here. So it's about 3 o'clock in Tel Aviv. I got a message through that WhatsApp saying we meet at 5:30 around the main what do you call it? It's like where you store equipment. Forget what's the word in English. Where some people have it in their backyards to store, their hose, whatever equipment they have for the garden. So yeah, it's like a. Yeah, I can look it up. It's a storage, basically a storage space that the group, the Pink Front, has. They call people, they say, we'll meet there at 5 o'clock, and we hand out the equipment. So the pink megaphones, the shirts, the drums, it's like a military organization in one way or another. You have to be very organized ahead of time. But again, like they said, once you get out to the field, then it's going to be messy and chaotic. So WhatsApp groups are very important. Live streaming of their website, of course, they have you can check the website. I think it's simply pinkfront.org.il. And most of it, of course, is in Hebrew, but they do have a section in English, and they have a few videos. They have a database of pictures that's, I don't know, they have like hundreds of thousands of pictures there. So a website, an Instagram, what is it called? Even an Instagram page, I guess. An Instagram page that they do live streaming during demonstrations very often. So there's a host of digital spaces, instruments, and activity and practices that they're used both before, during, and after. there were quite a few actually also interviews with them over the years in the Israeli media. I think there was actually one article that was published about them, a research article about the group, but it was from the perspective of cultural studies, basically focusing on their artistic practices. So it was Journal of Visual Arts or something like that. I can find it and send it around. So the whole pink thing and the whole, it's a carnival, basically. Yeah. So yeah, digital spaces are very important. We, like I said earlier, we didn't focus enough, I feel. But yeah, maybe, it's there, it's documented, and if we decide to write a paper on that as well, it's not going to be too difficult.
Eu entendi. Ele trouxe as partes positivas, mas uma coisa que passou pela minha cabeça também é que temos a parte negativa da contemporaneidade, que isso que inflamou tantas pessoas a irem à rua a protestarem, de não estarem conformadas, mas eu vejo muito conforto em muitas situações, justamente pelas facilidades que nós temos atualmente. Então, a minha segunda parte da pergunta seria: quais as dificuldades da nossa, não da nossa geração, quais limites esses recursos que podem ser usados positivamente podem trazer?
We talk a little bit about about one side of the use of the digital space. All of that are good side to use it. Can you see something bad? A limit or a difficulty on using?
Maybe in Brazil we are like accommodated by the positive sides of the technology in social media. So do you see it? I think she has like a question, personal question about. Uhum.
Então, por exemplo, eu estou aqui hoje porque eu senti um desconforto em estar aqui hoje. Mas quantas pessoas do meu curso não estão aqui hoje? Então, eu tenho esse pensamento sim. Então, por muitas vezes que eu estava fora, você pode ver pelo YouTube, você pode acessar uma página que já tem pessoas que estão fazendo, você mesmo não faz. Então, é isso que querendo passar aí.
I'm gonna try it. Okay. What motivates young people to get out of their places of their accommodation when they see people protesting and they feel, well, they are protesting, I don't need to. Something like that. They're accommodated in a way that this kind of mobilization does not call for them. Yeah? So yeah, because you can have a use of social media as passive use.
Yeah.
They're there, I don't need to be there, or
No, it's a
this struggle is not mine.
yeah. It's a
I'm in favor, but I don't have to go there.
It's a
Yeah, exclusively in social media. Yeah. I interviewed one young feminist. She used to say that her collective, we in Brazil we translate coletivo feminista, like a feminist collective, not a feminist group. Yeah. And her collective was exclusively in social media. And I asked her, why? Why don't you go to streets on 8 March or November 25 to protest? No, we don't need to. We are struggling in social media. We are providing political training in social media. That's our struggle. That's our territory.
Yeah. No, it's a very, very valid question. I'll say a few things. First of all, with regards to the last point, I think the way the activists see it, digital spaces are an extension or an aid. They're not instead of physical space. In other words, they are using what the digital technology or technology has to offer them. They use it to enhance and increase their effect, their membership, and so on and so forth. But it's just it's an auxiliary, right? It's not it cannot replace. I think that would be, we didn't ask them specifically that question, but I think that would be their reaction. I would say that. I mean, I don't want to give, and maybe it came out like that. So if so, I'm sorry, but I don't want to give the impression that the majority of youth or young people went out to the streets. Even if we're talking about 200,000 people, I think the largest demonstration was like close to 400, but I'm not sure. One evening was very like well attended. But there are 10 million people, okay, in the country. So 400,000, let's say that there were 200,000 young people. It's still a fraction. So the majority of young people are either out there at home or in there, not out there, in there at home, in their homes, either because they, I don't think it's because they're lazy, but some of them live far away and maybe they don't want to get, it's difficult for them to reach the points of departure. Some of them may well be against it because they see the measures taken by the government as justified. Yes, judges are too lefty. And so it's about time we balance the composition and have some more conservative and right-wing judges. Yeah. So I don't know what the reason is, but the fact of the matter is that it's a very, very small minority that actually went out. The positive side of that is that they made so much noise with their megaphones and with their collars and so on and so forth that they've managed to have a positive impact. The reform was not completely stopped. It was slowed down. Then, of course, the political situation, the geopolitics got involved in the middle, Lebanon and Gaza and Iran and what have you, so many different conflicts. And so it kind of slowed down, but now again, it's on the front burner and people are going out. But like I said, the motivation now is different. Okay. But I think it's a valid question to ask whether in the digital age, how important is it for people to have what we call boots on the ground? to be out there? Is it enough, especially for young people? Is it enough to be supportive from afar, or do you actually need to be there week in, week out to show your presence? Because numbers are very important. I showed you the picture with the drone. Okay, every demonstration I've been to, there are at least 4 or 5 different drones. One by the police, one by the city, one by protester movements. Why? Because it's a numbers game. It's a numbers game because then somebody reports to the newspaper and you start getting pushes while you are there, pushes from the newspaper saying, 10,000 people, 50,000, and it makes a difference. People who sit at home and said, oh my God, 150, 200,000 people were out there. And some of them are my friends, some of them are my colleagues. Next week, I'm going to join them. So it has a very important impact. One more thing that I just heard, which has to do with the digital technology, is that in some countries, I think China, maybe I'm wrong, so don't quote me on that, but I think in China and some other more restrictive regimes, when protesters start marching, somehow magically the internet connection becomes less. Either the signal is not as strong or it completely collapses, right? Because one of the ideas behind it is to make sure that you limit the impact of the demonstration to whomever is there. And if there's no internet, then you cannot send WhatsApp, you cannot live stream, you can, and so that's also, there's a way, because and I think the question is valid, because we tend to think about digital spaces as liberating. They're emancipatory spaces, but no, they could just as easily be used by big firms and by government, repressive governments and so on and so forth to limit and democratic spaces. So they have both sides, I think.
And considering the algorithm,
Yeah.
you can be in kind of a bubble. And here in Brazil, the right wing is very strong in social media as well. So we have different forces using this kind of space as they use the city as well. So it's kind of space of protest as well. So my former research on young feminists has the same design as yours, like with personal interviews with young feminists in Brazil, in big cities, small cities, because we had this kind of first ideas that in smaller cities is most difficult to be a feminist and to protest. So we have this, we didn't dialogue with geographers or architects, but the feeling was there. Smaller cities, the political advocacy for feminism is quite different from big cities. We had online research. We followed a bunch of profiles of feminists. In Brazil, we have a spectrum of profiles, going to a person, a feminist, that go to the social media to protest, to make some psychoeducation on feminism. And the main collectives, all of them have pages, have profiles on Instagram as well. We did participant observation of manifestations on the main dates of protest, as I told you, on March 8 and November 25, and some specific protests we had in Latin America. Chilean group of women, artivists, Las Tesis. Have you heard about them? No? Have you heard about them? Las Tesis? Sim. last thesis, four artists, feminist artists, they design a chant, and on their page and on Instagram, they posted a call for this performance and asked for the women to come in glam outfit, and they the protest was very simple in a way. There was this como é que chama caixa de som, gente? The speaker, this large speaker with a tune, tum tum tum. No, yeah, it's not. Yeah, a big one, and with a dance, a performance, and lyrics. So they essayed first, like a rehearsal of the act, and all the lyrics was based on the thesis of Rita Segato. Rita Segato is an anthropologist, a feminist, Argentinian. Yeah. And the performance was so effective online and spread throughout the main cities in the world. It's very interesting as an interaction last thesis. It was in 2019, last thesis, the thesis. Yeah, last thesis, because they are translating into performance and a kind of denúncia, gente. Complain? Yeah, a protest. Yeah. They're translating feminist ideas into performance to say that violence against women, that is the most converging agenda within feminism differences. And the performance itself, it's astonishing. The one that occurred in Mexico City was very impressive, because they spread the idea worldwide, and every city that reproduced their version of the performance is a rapist in your path, violador em seu caminho. And every city has something to add to the lyrics. It's very, yeah, very interesting. I wrote about it, but it's in Portuguese. We can manage a Google, a chat GPT translation to you. But it's very interesting because the online and the online reach of the performance was very compelling for other collectives to reproduce it in their cities. Here in Belo Horizonte was December 15 in 2019, just before the COVID pandemic. I was there because of the study. But it's very interesting for the study of online and offline perspective, because it was huge.
Just a quick reaction. I have a colleague actually at the gender studies department at Bar Ilan, and one of her big projects in recent years is actually gay couples in peripheral towns. This goes to your point about, because it's not surprising, but we tend to associate gay communities and gay couples living in highly urban areas, in large cities and so on, global cities. And New York has its own like sort of gay neighborhood, San Francisco, and so on and so forth. But one of the things she was trying to do was to see how gay couples who are identified as gay, what is the reaction and how do they narrate their own lives in very peripheral and supposedly conservative communities. So it's very much sort of what you mentioned, because we tend to associate big cities with much more liberal attitudes and so on, and smaller communities with more conservative, right wing, and so on. So what does it mean to live as a gay couple or as a gay family in such a community when your neighbors, you don't hide your identity from your neighbors and so on? So anyways, just thought about it, the difference between rural and urban spaces in terms of how much you can reveal of your identity.
I want to add something to the conversation, because as everybody was saying about the social media, the impact of social media on youth, I think that in Brazil that happens that the youth is mostly on social media than the ground, because the politicians are also attacking on social media. We had, I don't know, maybe last year, daquela mudança do PIX, foi ano passado? Que o Nicolas Ferreira soltou aquele vídeo. Foi esse ano ou ano passado? Okay, so last year we had the government made a change about a payment mechanism that we have in Brazil. So a politician from here, a really conservative one, a young one who's like maybe 28, 26, I don't know. He made a reel on Instagram that impacted like a lot of young people, old people, everybody that agrees with him. He made a real change in the whole narrative about what the government was trying to do. So I think maybe young people here are trying to be on social media because the attacks and the conservative things are also coming from the social media, because we have a lot of politicians using social media marketing and mechanisms to promote themselves. Actually, the last president used it a lot, the social media, to spread fake news. So I think the social media now is giving most impact on people here than the ground protests. So I think it's maybe like my hypothesis.
Anna, adding to your reflection, I don't believe that left-wing thought or politician or even organized groups are that effective in social media, on social media, as the conservatives and right-wing are. They master social media communication throughout different ages. I believe that the spread of this kind of reel by WhatsApp for elder, for instance, it's massive. They mastered the deal.
Yeah, no, it's an, I don't want to say an old, because it's not that old, but it's a debate that's been going on for, I think, at least 10, 15, 20 years, how is social media used in digital spaces? And it's certainly, I think we need to be very careful, and I hope this is not the sentiment that I conveyed, but yes, social media can be used for progressive ideas and thoughts and so on and so forth. But as you mentioned, just as easily and maybe more easily used to spread out fake news and information and hateful speech and so on and so forth. Yeah, I think I can think of a few presidents and prime ministers who have done wonders in that sense. The other thing I wanted, so I don't know, I think it's each case you would have to look at specifically in order to figure out how was it used and what kind of messages were circulated, but definitely both sides can use it for different purposes. One thing I wanted to say, and that's something we should, and it also I think came from what your question, that we have to be very careful about associating young people with progressive ideas. You know, you mentioned the 26 or 28 year old politician. I can think of hundreds like that in Israel and the US, you know, young ministers, young, mayors who incite against immigrants, who incite against young people, against poor people, saying against, asylum seekers, saying that they are a burden on the national economy. I mean, that sort of behavior is ripe, and I don't think it's just like violence against women. You know, it comes from all walks of life, right? You can be rich, you can be poor, you can be educated, you can be less educated, of different races and colors and ethnicities. And so I think we have to be careful to say, oh, he's young or he's below the age of 25. So yeah, definitely he has progressive ideas, or he's voting for, social democrats or whatever. Yeah, definitely not.
Good morning. My name is Rafaela. I'm a student of architecture, and I would like to thank you very much, because even though my English is really out of practice, I was able to understand your ideas. So thank you for both presentations. Today, I especially like the part of the color pink. I am a fan of pink, and I thought it was really interesting because here in Brazil, we have a strong character of humor and irony in our protests. And I think that's a characteristic that refers to youth too, this kind of humor and ironic protests. But if you allow me to go back in yesterday's presentation, yesterday I said I was going to bring a good question, but I don't have a specific question. Actually, I was reflecting, and I'm not too I don't know much about the refugees and migrant situation in Brazil, like you were asking, but I was recently reading this book, and I imagine you know what is a quilombo. Yeah, I think you will understand this. Antônio Bispo dos Santos, also known as Nego Bispo, is a quilombola writer and philosopher. And this book's called A Terra Dá, A Terra Quer. It means land or earth. I think it refers to both. So the earth wants, the earth gives and the earth wants. And I remember two pieces that refers to a pandemic. So I translated it, and if you allow me, I would like to share with you and with all of you. I really recommend this book if you want to start 2026 with a fresh breath. I think it's a really good reading. So he says, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, some groups of society warned, Quilombola communities are going to die. Indigenous people are going to die. They will die first because they are the most vulnerable. Vulnerable. Yeah. They made it up that we are the most vulnerable. I am in a quilombo with more than 100 families, 5 kilometers from the city. Quilombos do not have large crowds. We live spread out. We visit one another, but not in large numbers. We go to the fields every day. There, it is just us and the forest. Here, we practice self-management. We have an association, but it only serves to relate to the state. That's why no one is interested in being president. Our governance happens through collective work days, funerals, celebrations, birthdays, masses, terreiros, and the fields. When a problem arises, we solve it right away. Meanwhile, politicians met in Brazilians to solve the pandemic problem in the Amazon. While that was happening, people were dying without oxygen because those who decide were in Brasilia. So that's the first piece. And the second is really the end of the book. And he says, why do we get less sick in the quilombos in the pandemic? A great master explained to us. In quilombo, we have relationships. We don't have crowds. Crowds are made of bodies that do not know one another, that do not touch one another. And since they do not relate, they do not become immune. We who relate, who embrace one another, become immune. And the last paragraph, I think it's really beautiful and it talks about the today's presentations too. He says, we are people of trajectories. That's it. We are not people of theory. I think it also have to do with the vernacular knowledge that you brought to us too. We are of circularity, beginning, middle, and beginning. Our lives have no end. The grandmother generation is the beginning. The mother generation is the middle. The granddaughter generation is the beginning again. I think it is beautiful. So that's why I brought to share I think my contribution as a young student is that we have to search all kinds of knowledge, not only the ones that university offers. So thank you.
No, thank you. Yeah, sure. No, very inspiring words. I don't know if the book was translated to any other languages.
I think not yet, but maybe.
Yeah, I heard a little bit about the Kilimbos. Kilimbos? Yeah, she explained to me, but I don't know enough, I have to say. But yeah, this sort of indigenous knowledge and indigenous expertise and vernacular knowledge, as we called it yesterday, is extremely important. Not just in the sense of, and maybe a lot of it comes, I think, through very sort of unofficial channels, right? It's through stories, it's through art, it's through things that are very often they kind of go unnoticed under the radar. And so I think research with indigenous communities is extremely important in order to document the stories, in order to bring out the data and the information and spread it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's beautiful, the two texts that you read. I looked, remember yesterday I found it in my pictures, it's Rachel, Raquel, maybe you can read what it says here. This is the memorial. For some reason, my colleague took a picture of the murals, but this is just the plaque about the Brazilians who perished during the, it's not a very good, it's kind of hard to read, huh?
Tem um brilho na foto, então tá um pouquinho difícil de ler. Mas eu vou tentar. Desde março de 2020, aos brasileiros de todas as idades, etnias, crenças. Eu acho que tá... sei lá, às vezes alguém mais jovem.
Desde março de 2020, milhares de brasileiros de todas as idades, etnias, crenças e classes sociais perderam suas vidas para um mesmo inimigo, a Covid-19. Coexistência é um trabalho que representa as diversas manifestações de fé da humanidade em uma única oração. Em memória aos que se foram, que haja paz entre os que ficam. Inaugurado em 2021, este é um memorial da fé em honra a todas as vítimas da Covid-19.
I thought it was a really interesting plaque because we don't think about it very often. I mean, it's been 5 years, and it's like people have been forgotten, but and it's kind of nice how they've used COVID and memorizing COVID as in a sort of unifying message. Also, I thought, because we all remember that COVID was very often for a lot of politicians a time to draw divisions. Migrants are to blame, poor people are to blame, this group is to blame, that group is to blame. So I thought it was a very kind of refreshing message, and the fact that it's out there in public space and anybody can see it, I thought it was meaningful. Yeah, thanks.
Rafa, I found an essay of Nego Bispo translated into English. We belong to the land. I've sent to you, and you can send it to him. But a terra dá, a terra que a terra dá, tá previsto para ser... Como é que é? Yeah, a terra dá, a terra quer. It's foreseen to be translated into Spanish this year, the next year, not into English yet, because people who speak English are dumb.
But she found another book. Just an essay. Okay. Okay. She found an essay translated to English, and we will send it to you. For another, yes.
It's a contra-colonial view. Yeah.
Let's have a lunch.
All right, thank you very much. I just wanted to say I appreciate you coming both yesterday and today. And I told Raquel very, very thoughtful questions. I'm not just saying it here. She can attest that I said it yesterday, not to your face. And it's really, I mean, I'm really touched by the questions. I think they were very mature and very thoughtful. So thanks for coming. And yeah, go spread knowledge and do research and with indigenous people, with precarious groups, with migrants, and so on and so forth. Thanks. Obrigado.
Yes, thank you. Again. Sim, Abdul cuida de tudo por nós. Abdul fez fotos.